Start the recording. Okay, so welcome to the session. I was asked to do this by quite a number of Comrades runners. I know a lot of people couldn't join us tonight, but quite a few people said that they wanted to do this as well. And I will be doing some other sessions as we get closer to Comrades. So I thought the way to do the session would be simply going through a lot of the questions that were submitted, and it might give you some ideas as to what some of the athletes are asking and how to deal with certain things. I've gone through some of the questions. There are some very good questions in actual fact, some very thorough questions that some people asked, and I'm going to try and address them and ask as much as possible. If you have got a question that you want to ask, you can also pop it in the chat. I will go to the chat and I'll have a look there, and I'll try and get through everything as much as possible. And then I'll also just give a few additional tips, race tips from a hydration, a fueling perspective, as we head towards Comrades. So just give me a second. I just want to put up this document I put these questions into a Word doc. Just going to stop and reshare this new screen. There we go. Okay, just let me know if you can see that. Maybe let me just try and zoom, make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. Can you see that? Can you see some of those questions? Just let me know in the chat if you can see what's on the screen. I just want to make sure. I will read through them regardless. Okay, so I'm just going to start with the questions and run through them. I think all these questions are pretty valid, and basically I'll also answer some of the questions that have been asked in the chat. Okay, so just a quick introduction. My name is Mark Wolff. I'm one of the co-founders of 32GI. I'm sort of an exercise physiologist with a focus on nutrition and sports nutrition, also preventative health and blood chemistry, which plays a big role in that. And I've been in the endurance space for over 30 years now. And yeah, I just love helping people live healthy, happy lives. And I think it's very important to, from a health point of view, to get your exercise, your nutrition, and your training all fitting together properly, because exercise is supposed to empower health and be a benefit to you, not a detriment. Most important thing for most of you, get you to the finish line of Comrades with a smile on your face. So I know that the training is hard, and you guys will be putting in a lot of volume over the last couple of months. It's very difficult. Right now, you're probably sick of training, legs are feeling fatigued, very tired. There's still a bit of load to come. And then obviously now we start to sharpen as you head towards the big event. And the only thing you can really focus on now is the training's pretty much done, getting there healthy, and also bedding down your feeding strategy on the day. That's what we're going to talk about this evening. Okay, so the first question, how long before the start time should you have your last fluid? And it's actually a very valid question, because some people have got very sensitive bladders. I'm one of those people, and I don't like to consume too much fluid prior to a race. So I think the best thing is that you've got to understand, if you overconsume fluid, and you might need to run up and down to a portaloo, and you might not be able to sit in the starting gates because your bladder's full. So you just try and need to time and make sure that your fluid intake is a sufficient amount, but not something that's going to overly cause any stress on the bladder, that's going to prevent lack of absorption and then send you to the toilet. So, you can sip up to a couple of minutes before the start, as long as you feel comfortable, as long as it's not excessive. I personally generally stop drinking probably around 20 minutes before the start of an event. And I also take in a fair amount of sodium to try and maximize the fluid absorption, also get my mineral stores up as much as possible. I have spoken previously in some of the other presentations, and if you want to go and watch them, they are on YouTube. We have sent them out to our channels, but I've spoken quite a bit in depth around hydration and how you can mineral load leading up to the event. So taking in a fairly high amount of sodium on a daily basis with your fluid intake. I mean, we obviously use our product, which is Hydrate, and you could take 2 to 3 bottles a day to maximize your hydration stores because sodium really does create those water stores, and it also by elevating your sodium levels, you'll be able to retain that much more fluid, and it really does help maximize your hydration status. Remember, when you sweat, you're losing fluid as well as minerals, mainly in the form of sodium. Higher salt eaters will sweat more salt, lower salt eaters will sweat less salt. So you've got to try and understand, from a point of sodium consumption or salt consumption, what that would be like. So generally, looking at the amount of fluid I consume before an event, I have probably a half a bottle of a Hydrate about 2 hours before. I don't like to take in too much fluid, as I mentioned. And then I also love my coffee. So that is a form of hydration. It's not going to dehydrate you. I find caffeine's got a benefit, and I do like to have like a very strong, I actually make a French press, a strong pot of coffee, which I drink slowly around 2.5 to 2 hours before the event. And then I actually just leave it. I don't take in any more fluid. I let it sit for about an hour. So I want to make sure that I haven't overloaded my bladder. Obviously, you've got some time still to run to the toilet if you need to. And then I would say that on the way to the event or to the start, I would probably just sip a little bit more on an isotonic solution like an energy drink or a Hydrate, for example, just to sort of top up my energy stores as well as also just taking a little bit more fluid. So I think that's from a fluid intake, that's really what I would suggest. Not overdoing it. It's very difficult because it's very unique from individual to individual. So the most important thing is don't overhydrate significantly. There's no need to. Remember, when you start running, it is going to be cooler at the start. Not as cold as in Pietermaritzburg to Durban, but it is going to be cooler at the start still because it's an early morning start. You probably won't sweat as much in the early morning as you will much later on in the day. So you do have time to consume fluid through the event to maximize your hydration status. And I saw there were some questions on that, and I'll get to those as well. Somebody said, is there an alternative for gels from your products? Gels are too sweet. I agree. Gels can be overly sweet. Some people can handle them. Some people can't. We've got our Snap gels and our Race Pro gels. I prefer the Race Pro gels because it's not sweet. I find that it's actually very palatable and it sits well with me. I find our Snap gels are a little bit too sweet and concentrated for me, so I like them less frequently, where Race Pro I could utilize the whole time. But there are other options. There's chews, there's bars, there's natural foods as well, which people have mentioned that you could take en route from an energy perspective. And I will talk about that a little bit later. But absolutely, there's a variety of options that can be utilized as an exogenous energy source. So that means taking carbohydrates from the outside in. That's what an exogenous source is. And basically, it's a matter of, it doesn't matter what you consume, as long as it's some form of energy and you understand the volume or the amount of that amount of energy. Because like I mentioned in previous videos that we've done, or podcasts, is that it's very important to understand the amount of carbohydrates you're consuming on an hourly basis through an event. And you have to stick to that value to provide you a substantial and efficient amount of energy that can be utilized during the event. Someone said they're utilizing another product. Can they switch to 32 GI? Look, you've still got time to try it. I would test a product before you use it on race day to see if it's palatable and if it's suitable. I wouldn't try something brand new on race day. So you've still got time to test. You're still a couple of weeks out, 3.5 weeks out. You've still got time to test on some runs, longish runs, fast, hard intensity runs. Always try and make sure that you test the products and make sure that they do sit well with you. Somebody said, what must they do regarding nutrition on pre and during race day? Look, I did the previous webinar we did last week actually deals with that in depth. You can go to the 32GI YouTube channel and watch it. speaking about that, there is so much to focus on, and it would take me a very long time to explain that. So it's best you go to the webinar. And if you've got any questions after that, then feel free to send them through to us and ask. I cannot handle all the needed gels and bars I need during a race. Sometimes I want to vomit. It's just too much, but I still need fueling. So the problem is that if you overconsume a certain portion of concentrated carbohydrates, it can lead to nausea. It can lead to a sugar overload. It can lead to gastrointestinal discomfort. You've got to understand that any concentrated energy form that you take in is what we call a hypertonic solution. It's very concentrated. There's very little fluid with it. And when it goes into the gut, it does need to be absorbed. Will it be absorbed without fluid in there? No, it will not be absorbed without fluid in there. So if you have a gel, you have to have water with it. You definitely have to have water with it, unless it's a fluid gel or a liquid gel, which has already got a high percentage of water. So if I had to advocate a 32 GI snap gel, I would advocate taking at least 120 to 150 mils of water with it to help it become more isotonic, and that will pull through. It helps with the absorption. There's something called osmolality in the gut, where you get pressure on the outside, which is in the bloodstream, and you get pressure on the inside. And if you can match those pressures, you get a nice even pull through of fluid and energy, and that's what an isotonic solution is. If it sits very concentrated in the gut, you're going to put the system under stress. The body's going to try and pull water from the outside in to help with the digestive process. In the meantime, it's going to cause fermentation. It can cause bloatedness, and it causes a lot of gastrointestinal discomfort. So you cannot take a gel and then expect not to take water with it. You have to take water with a gel, unless the gel is a fluid gel. Now, like for example, our Race Pro gels have got a very high percentage of water blended there. So you could get away with that and not have a large amount of water at the same time, and you could actually spread it. But the minute it's a concentrated gel, which are standard gels, which are usually around 90 to 100 calories, you will need to consume water with it to allow for better absorption, to allow fluid to be pulled through, and to allow the energy to be pulled through. That alone can lead to nausea. Okay, so that's one of the things that can lead to nausea, overload, and not taking enough fluid. Another thing that can lead to nausea is overhydrating, taking in too much fluid. Because what actually happens is it sits in the stomach. You are diluting you dilute the sodium in the blood. This dilution actually lands up causing major havoc. You're not able to pull the water through. Okay, the body can only absorb so much water over a certain period of time. You could say it's possible absorbing 160, 170 mils every 20 minutes. And then if you had to add sodium and you had to add a bit of sugar to that, you'd actually pull through a large amount of water. But if the water is just going to sit in the stomach, you'll actually feel it sloshing around. We call that the washing machine effect. And that can actually land up coming back up on you and also causing nausea and causing somebody to throw up. So often overhydrating can trigger that as well. There's another thing that triggers nausea. This is number 3, dehydration. Not taking in a sufficient amount of fluid can also lead to that slump, that fatigue, and eventual onset of nausea as well. So those are the 3 things that can cause nausea. What have I seen at Comrades with my own eyes that's caused nausea? Very often, if you can't see sweet, or you can't look at sweet, or you're scared of sweet, then I can tell you now that you will probably have overconsumed a concentrated amount of glucose, and you haven't taken enough fluid to absorb it, and that will definitely leave you feeling like that. I've mentioned the overhydration and the washing machine effect. You'll feel heavy. You'll feel that sloshing. What happens if that happens? You stop drinking. Take in salt. Take in a bit of food. Try and get that fluid absorbed. When that washing machine stops and you don't feel it sloshing anymore, then you can start rehydrating. And then obviously, if you're dehydrated, I mean, you will definitely also feel that. Very often it can lead to the onset of muscle cramps. And with dehydration, you often get a little bit thirsty around the mouth. And And that might not necessarily be from just over consuming. Sometimes you get that sensitivity from consuming sweets or over consuming sweets, but absolutely, if you're feeling that dryness and that thirst, it's definitely a sign of that you possibly could be dehydrated. You never want that to happen. You want to preempt that. So you need to try and find a balance. And I'll talk a little bit about that later from a hydration perspective. Okay. So that's how one can vomit and how one can try and prevent it. Okay, I'll get into a bit more detail. Someone wrote here, I'm running my first Comrades, weighs 97, 6'5". So definitely at that weight, someone will think they're overweight, but the height is very significant. So very big bone structured kind of individual, very heavy, just naturally tall and big. Consuming 1 gram of carbs per kilogram per hour. That would probably work if you can stomach that, absolutely. Would you recommend this for running 11 hours or can it be toned down? I think if you, okay, so that's a very interesting question. Because sports nutrition guidelines recommend 30 to 60 grams per hour, and we even go up to 90 grams of carbs per hour in long ultra distance events that go 3-4 hours or longer. Okay. The question is, can you handle 90 grams of carbs per hour? This guy's talking 97 grams, but let's look at 90. Can you handle it? The only way you would know is if you tried and tested it. Did you do your long 5 or 6 hour run? Did you take in 90 grams per hour then? How did it feel? And that would be something that would be important to test. I don't know if it was tested. What I would recommend if it hasn't been tested is to actually tone it down, because you do run the risk. I'd probably go down to 60 grams, 60, 70 grams per hour, and I'd probably sit around there in a safety zone, as opposed to trying to go to the upper end and maybe causing some gastrointestinal distress. Okay. The only way you would know whether you should be consuming on the upper end or the lower end is based on your actual effort that you are running at. What is effort when you are doing exercise? Effort is not your pace. A lot of people tell me, I'm running slowly, I'm running 6 minutes a K. 6 minutes a K for some people is fast. 6 minutes a K for some people is walking. Okay, so it's not relative to the pace. It's relative to what your heart rate is doing at that point in time. A percentage of your maximum heart rate is the ultimate accurate determination of what kind of stress you are putting your body under. Why is it doing that? Because obviously, as your heart rate comes up, this can determine oxygen supply to the body. Oxygen supply to the body ultimately determines which energy system you're tapping into. A lack of oxygen, which is more closer to your glycolytic and anaerobic zones, will mean that there's less oxygen available, and fat to be converted into a fuel source requires more oxygen, and that's more aerobic, which means that your carbohydrate stores are being depleted at a fairly rapid rate, and carbohydrate ingestion is very important if your heart rate is sitting in that zone. If you're sitting in an aerobic zone for a very long period of time, you can tone down your carbohydrate intake as long as you're making sure that that is your aerobic zone and you understand what that zone is. Aerobic zone meaning around, I would say, let's go between 60 to 70, maybe 5% of your maximum heart rate. It really depends if you've done proper lactate threshold testing. And you can see what that crossover is from LT1 and then moving up into LT2. So if you don't understand what those thresholds are, it can be quite dangerous. Just as an example, I mean, I'm 52 years old. I have a maximum heart rate of about 184. I've got a rest heart rate of 32. My aerobic zone means that I cannot go over a maximum heart rate of 136 beats per minute. That's really where my aerobic zone would sit. The minute I go over a certain zone, okay, let's say I go closer to, once I start going glycolytic in zone 3, then I'm sitting at about 158 beats per minute. And then that's where I'm starting to burn matches. If I'm sitting in that zone between 142 and 158 beats per minute, I better be fueling at a fairly rapid rate and a much higher carbohydrate intake. If I could hold my heart rate down quite much lower because I'm running at a much slower pace, or also cool. Also, it's cold outside, so I'm not getting what we call cardiac drift, because as your core body temperature climbs, you're also getting elevated heart rate. You move into another zone. So how does that come back to fueling? Quite simple. I said you could play it safe. You could look at around that 60 grams of carbs per hour, and that might be a safe zone for you. It might not be enough for you, though. The question is what is going to happen through the event? And that will be able to allow you to still dynamically adjust your nutrition while you're exercising. So if you're starting at 60 grams per hour, and the first hour or two, you're actually managing to hold a really good steady pace, a nice slow pace. The temperatures are cool. Your heart rate's not climbing significantly. They're very controlled. Aerobic, basically, if you can hold a conversation, you're definitely running at an aerobic pace. If you can speak a sentence of 8 or 9 words, you're probably running at an aerobic pace. If you can only say like 3 or 4 or 5 words and then you've got a breath, you're not running in an aerobic pace. So conversational pace is aerobic. That's a nice measurement as opposed to keep looking at your watch and your heart rate monitor. But if you feel that your heart rate's climbing because you're just going to get a natural drift over time with temperature climb, as the race gets longer, your body's exerting more, you're losing more fluid, your blood is thickening, your heart's working harder to divert blood to the surface of the skin to sweat more, and so your heart starts to increase. Your heart rate starts to increase. At that stage, you might actually have to shift the nutrition dynamically by adjusting and increasing your carbohydrate intake as your heart rate starts to climb. So you might decide, okay, I'm going to go to 70 grams per hour now. See how you feel. You're feeling comfortable. You're feeling stable. Your heart rate's stable. Stay there. And if your heart rate starts to climb some more, you might want to even start to take in even a higher amount of carbohydrate. So that's how I would approach that, so that you've got a little bit of control. Because if you do start off too high and you are sitting in an aerobic zone, you also could overload the gut, especially if you're looking at around 90 grams. So maybe if you've practiced it, great. If you haven't practiced it, risk. You want to take the risk off, lower it, and play it safe. Okay, I hope that makes sense. How much do I put into the body before the start of a marathon, and how long would it last? Okay, so we're talking obviously pre-race meal. A pre-race meal should be consumed around 2 to 2.5 hours at least before the start of a race. It's very important to understand that it doesn't necessarily have to be 2.5 hours. It could be an hour before, it could be 4 hours before, it could be 3 hours before. The most important thing is that whatever you consume from a volume perspective, you need to be able to make sure that it will be broken down and digested, and that you will feel very comfortable, okay, when it comes to the actual start of the race. You can't be running very uncomfortable with a heavy gut with lots of food sitting in it. It's the worst feeling. And as a runner, I like to feel light when I run. I don't like to feel heavy. So I would recommend, if it's based on your weight and based on how long you're eating before an event, ultimately we can determine how much the volume of that meal size should be. And generally 2 to 3, and let's put it down in the middle, 2.5 hours before. I would say if you weigh like 60 to 70 kilograms, you could probably consume around 3 grams of carbohydrates to 4 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. And that would take you up to, you can go anywhere between like 250 to 450 grams of carbs, okay? And that would be fine. If you're eating 3 or 4 hours before, you can go much higher. Maybe you can go 7 to 8 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So you can eat maybe a 600 or 700 calorie meal, because 3.5, 4 hours before, by the time you get to the start, that would be taken care of as well. What I would advocate is that I prefer eating a nominal size meal, and as I get closer to the event, I can carry on sipping or breaking down nutritional intake. So I generally go for about a 400, 450 calorie meal 2.5 hours before. Personally, I use pre-race meal. I mix a little bit of honey in it, sometimes a little bit of peanut butter. I mix it up. I add sometimes a little bit of sliced banana, and I make it a substantial meal beforehand. Black coffee, and then I leave it sitting. an hour, 2 hours pass, I'm feeling great. Maybe it's a half an hour still to the start, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm feeling a little bit emptier. I'm feeling good. What do? 15, 20 minutes before the start, I might top up on a gel or a bar, or half an hour before, maybe I nibble on a banana or half a banana, etc. It doesn't matter what you're taking on as long as you are feeling comfortable from a digestive perspective. Whatever you take on is going to be utilized as an energy source. It will not sit in excess. It will not sit there and do nothing. If it's carbohydrates, it will be broken down. It will be used as energy. Absolutely, it will be used as energy, and you're not going to have an overload. Okay. So the idea is to set up your energy system very, very well before the start of the event, and do not skip a pre-race meal. Just some athletes that I've worked with over the years, even professional athletes. One came to mind, Caroline Bosman, where we're on the start of 2 oceans. 2 bananas was her pre-race meal. And that was probably within the hour before the start of the race. So that's a simple example of somebody that couldn't eat too much before a race. Bananas were easy for them, and it was a certain amount of time before. And then the fueling strategy during the race is where it really started to take hold. Some of the athletes that I've also worked with, overcooked white rice. They let it sit the night before. They add some honey in it, a bit of peanut butter, some cinnamon, sometimes a little bit of protein. Next morning, they actually just add a bit of boiling water, mix it up, and they eat it. Pre-cooked white rice meal is what I eat. That's the pre-race meal. But it is pre-cooked white rice. So if you had to eat white rice, it would be very, very similar. It's just you're making it yourself. So whole food and natural food can still be the way to go. Some people have asked me about bread. Bread's fine. Don't go with whole wheat bread. Don't go with high fiber bread. Go with white bread, because fiber is not going to benefit your energy system. You need to consume something that's easily broken down, can be absorbed and utilized as a source of energy. You can take your bread and you can put Nutella. Yes, Nutella if you want on it. You can put honey on it. You can put banana on it. I don't mind. Some people like eggs. I would say rather have more bread and less egg, because eggs are protein and fat. Protein and fat take time to break down and get converted into an energy source. They do not get utilized immediately. They're not the most efficient energy sources. I would say a little bit of egg white on a lot of white bread is the best way to go. And that would probably be a lot better meal. You could have a small amount of fat if you wanted, in the form of spreading a little bit of avo or a little bit of butter on the bread if you wanted, as an example. And then oats is another one. If you're going with oats, I wouldn't go with a rolled oats. I'd probably go with a more processed oats, like an instant oatmeal. It's probably easier. Also, if you're preparing it in your hotel room, it's easier, unless the hotel's actually got oats that's already been cooked that you can eat. So you can have oats. It does have a percentage of fiber in it. So for some people, it doesn't sit very, very well. But you can add some banana in, some honey in, and a little bit of peanut butter. You can actually make it quite substantial. Most important is don't overeat. Make sure you're comfortable, and that would be my advice from a pre-race meal perspective. Okay. Somebody said, at what kilometer am I supposed to take in my nutrition? I mentioned earlier, never worry about pace. Worry about time. Worry about time. When you're feeding, and if you go look at the previous webinars I've done, you need to clock feed. Clock feeding is so important. The most optimal time to consume your energy is around 30-minute feeds. We call that drip feeding. 20 to 30 minutes, you eat something. Don't leave it for 40 to 60 minutes. It's too long. You need to know how much you're consuming hourly. That is true sports nutrition. If you're eating 60 grams an hour, 30 grams at 30 minutes, 30 grams at an hour, 30 grams at 90 minutes, 30 grams at 2 hours. Can you break it up? Yes, I can take a gel at 30 minutes or 20 minutes of 24 grams, if it's a 24-gram gel like somebody mentioned, or a 30-gram gel, 30 minutes. And then when I get to the 60-minute mark, I could take in a half a banana. When I get back to the 90-minute mark, then I could take in another gel. When I get back to the 2-hour mark, I can take in some chews, some blocks of chews, for example. You can split up your feed like that. I just don't like mixing a soup. I think that the more simple the feed, the better it is, because you can get it wrong. You would need to know the volume and the amount of every single thing that you're going to consume to nail your carbohydrate grammage target. And so it's way better to be able to measure that. And there are some athletes, like, for example, last year, I had one athlete, he ran a Wally Hayward, a very good friend of mine, actually running with him tomorrow, 1D. He took, I think it was 7 or 8 Race Pro gels. He ate them in under every single hour, and he ran a 5:57. He only stuck to one product. His hydration product was hydrate in bottles. So he would grab some bottles with a mineral solution in for hydration. That's what he ate, the whole of Comrades. So the questions I get asked is, can you really stick to one product for a whole Comrades? Absolutely. And I've had athletes that have done 11-hour Comrades also on one product. So it really depends on keeping it simple, taste, texture, and what you can handle. If you get the volume right, if you get your fueling right, you shouldn't feel nauseous, you shouldn't feel hungry, you shouldn't feel fatigued, you should feel energetic and feel stable the whole way through, assuming you've done the proper training for the event. Okay. How many gels do I need to carry for Comrades Marathon? I mean, that question is been answered by my previous statement. How many grams of carbs are you consuming per an hour? How big are your gels? A Race Pro gel is 75 grams worth of carbohydrate energy. It's actually 67 plus 8 of protein, but all of that gets broken down within an hour and converted into energy source. You can call it a 75 gram. And if you were going to consume 60 grams an hour, you'd need to finish 3/4 of that gel, a little bit more, in an hour, as an example. If you were taking in a 32 GI snap gel, you're talking about 22 grams of carbs. You would need to take 3 of those in an hour, one every 20 minutes. You're running a 10-hour Comrades, that is 30 gels. Yes, you heard me right, 30 gels. So that is just how serious you need to take the energy intake, because it is a volume and it is something that needs to be measurable and utilized over a period of time. Okay. Somebody wrote here, last year fueled on Race Pro till 50 kilometers. And then looking for a variety of a strategy in the last 35 Ks, I guess, from 50 onwards to 85, 86. So this person had chocolate flavor the whole way. I agree. Sometimes it's very difficult to stick to one flavor. So that's why, like, if I use gels, I'll pick 2 flavored gels or 3 flavored gels, and I will switch the flavors in between so I don't get tied down to it. So like when I'm racing with the Race Pro gel, I've got cappuccino and vanilla, and I will alternate those gels so that I'm not stuck to one flavor, because that one flavor, your palate gets sensitized and can become a little bit overpowering over an extended period of time. But you could actually also have a break in between. So like I mentioned before, if you're clock feeding and you want to, if you're working with a Race Pro gel for 30 Ks, and then you decide, okay, I'm gonna break from the Race Pro gel. I'm gonna take in a half a banana, and then at the next 30 minutes, I'll go back to the Race Pro gel, and then you carry on. And then you find a table with potatoes. You're like, okay, 30 minutes, I'm gonna bite a potato or have two small potatoes if it works for you. And then you can go back to the gel. So you can break it up. Just make sure that the feeding is consistent and the volumes you're taking in are the right volumes. Okay. This was a really, really big question. I actually quite liked it because it actually touched on a lot of the things that I've actually mentioned now. So this particular individual, I've removed their name. I'm just trying to keep it anonymous. This particular individual actually mentioned here, they've been struggling on long runs over 2.5 hours. They run out of gas, start to cramp. Cramping can generally be fluid loss, just so you know, or it can be an overstrained muscle. So a muscle that can't handle the load, it can shift the load. And sometimes if the glutes fatigue, with weak glutes, you can get referral down the hamstrings and to other areas of the leg. So it is something you need to look at. Are you doing enough strength work? A sufficient amount of strength. I mean, it's specifically glute and functional. If you are, then maybe that's not the issue. Maybe it is fluid loss. Okay. Fatigue can definitely be an energy slump, but it can also be dehydration. 70 kilograms, 179 tall. It's a very good weight. It's a very lean person. I do stretch and warm up for 3 for 10 minutes before a run. Feel very flat when I start off running. Generally speaking, feeling flat when you start running is not a good sign. You should be feeling springy. You shouldn't be feeling flat unless you're very heavily loaded. Lack of sleep can cause that. Under eating, when it comes to your daily nutrition, can cause fatigue. It's very important to stress. I was saying to some athletes today, I had them on a discussion around daily nutrition. If you're burning off 1,600 or 1,700 calories a day at rest, in other words, you're not training, and you are building up massive volume, you want to try and eat, unless you're trying to lose weight, you want to try and eat in a calorie maintenance. This particular athlete is definitely not going to be looking at weight loss at that height and weight. I think it's a very good way to be at. I think in that case, you would probably want to be eating in a calorie maintenance. So you'd be eating 700 calories a day. But let's say you trained for an hour and a half and you burnt off 800 more or 900 calories. That's 1,700 plus 900. Now we're sitting at 2,600. Are you eating 2,600 calories a day? Or are you eating 2,000 calories a day? Is your calorie deficit too significant that it's going to impact your energy levels? And I've seen this a lot with athletes over the years. Some athletes overeat, but if you're doing a lot of volume in endurance training, most athletes will undereat. And what actually happens is calorie deficit, it's like a domino effect. It's okay going for a week or two, but as the calorie deficit starts to keep going, it's building up and up and up. And eventually your body is not getting enough nutrients to support the energy system and to allow for proper recovery from session to session. And then boom, domino effect, and you hit the fatigue. We often call this a energy deficit. I've seen in female athletes, we call it a RED-S, or relative energy deficiency syndrome. And this actually is a very big problem in the world of sport. So daily nutrition plays a very vital role. I won't go into nutrition right now. I'm actually planning on doing a webinar on how to actually approach nutrition, and this will be in a couple of weeks' time. But it's very important to consume the right amount of protein on a daily basis to allow for muscle protein synthesis and muscle recovery. And that also means no intermittent fasting. You cannot be fasting and doing fasted sessions and not recovering properly and doing these 16 to 8-hour windows, not when you're an endurance athlete, not when you're building up to Comrades, because you are putting yourself on the back foot from a recovery perspective. I eat 200 grams of protein a day. The human body can only process 12 grams an hour, approximately. That gives me 36 grams of protein every 3 hours to 40 at the most. I'm eating 200 grams a day. If I have to split it up, 200 divided by 12, that's how many hours I need to eat for. So just understand, in order to trigger muscle protein synthesis, you need to hit a leucine trigger. It's a branched chain amino acid. You need about 3 grams of leucine. That will be around 30 or so grams of 30 to 40 grams of a protein isolate, a whey protein isolate, or a plant protein isolate. If you do not consume enough protein in that meal, you're delaying the onset of your recovery process. If you're delaying the onset of your recovery process, what happens? It's going to wait for amino acid pooling until such time as you can trigger muscle protein synthesis so that you're able to recover. If you delay it too long, you're not going to recover for the next day. And there you are out, back on the road again, running and running. Now you put yourself on the back foot again. And this is where athletes start to crave sugar and chocolates and sweets, and they start to eat the wrong things. Yes, you're not going to end up putting on weight because you're in such an energy deficit, but it's not going to benefit your body from a recovery and energy perspective. So I'm just talking about if you're starting to run and you're feeling fatigued, you need to look at your training load, but you also definitely need to look at your dietary intake on a daily basis. Okay, they went through what they did at Oceans, etc. I'll just give an example here. 6 hours, 10 gels. 10 gels, 240 grams of carbs. And then peanuts. Peanuts is not energy for me. It's not going to give you energy. It will give you salt. But I mean, to break down peanuts and utilize it as a source of energy, it's not a great source of energy. Yeah, raisins will give you energy, absolutely. But also you've got to look at the fructose content. If you overeat raisins and the fructose content is too high, it can cause gastrointestinal distress and comfort, because the fructose channel in the human body, on average, can only process around 30 grams per hour. If you overload on that fructose channel, you're going to cause gastrointestinal distress. The glucose channel allows for 60 grams per hour. So glucose is a much better source for a higher carbohydrate intake. And then potatoes. The interesting thing was the person mentioned I don't eat. No, I don't know if it was this with sugar. I had half a banana, magnesium, so it was quite a lot. It was quite a lot of intake. But I think the important thing is that was the hourly intake completely measurable from a grammage point of view? And when you're consuming all of these things, if you don't understand what you're eating on an hourly basis, you could be eating 60 grams 1 hour, and then the next hour you could jump to 90 grams, maybe by mistake. Or you could be at 30 grams, which is a deficit, and then you're going to feel fatigued later on. So that's why it has to be a measurable, and you shouldn't mess around with things en route unless you understand what that calorie intake is when you're consuming. Okay, just mentioned here vegan, and then vitamin B deficiency. That can also cause issues of vitamin B deficiency, and it's been addressed from vitamin B shots. So I think that this is quite complicated in a way. Okay, it's very important to make sure that your daily diet is taken care of. That when you're exercising, you know what to consume before you're training, and then you've got to know how much you need to consume hourly during training, and then you obviously need to look at your recovery post-exercise. For a race, you have to know how many grams of carbs you're taking in per hour, and you've also got to understand your fluid consumption. We'll talk a little bit more about fluid consumption because at Comrades, that is quite important. Just by the way, this person mentioned vitamin B, bloods, etc. Unless a sports physician is running your bloods, I wouldn't trust the GP. I'm not saying GPs aren't amazing and fantastic at what they do, but unfortunately, you belong to 0.1% of the world's population, which is not a couch potato. You do a form of exercise, an aggressive form of exercise, which is endurance exercise, which is many hours of exercise on a daily basis, and that is not normal for a human being. So there are ranges of blood markers, and I am a blood chemistry expert, so I understand it quite intimately. But if an athlete comes to me and I look at their hemoglobin, or I look at their iron, or I look at their vitamin B or vitamin D levels, etc., and I see that, okay, hemoglobin's got a range of 12 to 19 as an example, depending on who does the laboratory tests and what system they're using to test. If an athlete is sitting at 12.5, a doctor will say, oh, you're in the range, so that is fine. I'm not happy. I want it to be 14, 15. I want it to be higher. If your iron stores, if your ferritin stores are sitting around 50, but the range is from like 30 to 150, would dosing on iron play a benefit to you? Sports physician might say, yes, it could play a benefit. Remember, you're doing things in extremes, so you cannot be sitting on the low levels of the ranges. You need to be more sufficient. You need to be on the upper levels of those ranges, and it's very important to do that. Okay, so just work with a sports physician and get thorough bloods run. You can see a lot from bloods. It's so important. A lot of athletes don't get proper bloods run, and I think that is just doing them a disservice, especially if you're putting your body under a huge amount of stress. Okay, sorry about that. Right. What is the best time to take gel during Comrades? I practice to take one before the start and then the other two at 40 and 60. I'm very scared to read that. Sorry, I just went through it. If you're only going to fuel at 40 and 60 with a gel, you are in big trouble because I don't know what energy intake you're taking before. It's time-based. Fueling is time-based. You need to stick to time-based. Don't go run this just without taking something. A normal individual will not fast for 12 hours a day. So if you're running for 12 hours a day, you need energy. You cannot be doing an event like this in a fasted state. It's just not a benefit to perform. Okay, I had to mention this. I actually should put this in red. How may I best use paracetamol anti-inflammatory for my sore shins and knees during the race? I actually laughed at this. I shared it with the family. Oh my God. Is it best to crush or dissolve paracetamol anti-inflammatory and mix it with 32 GI? No, it is not. You should never take a NSAID or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug in any endurance event ever. If you are in pain, then you should not be exercising or running. I don't care about FOMO. I don't care about medals at the finish line. I care about the health of an individual. I want you to live a long and healthy life. I have had athletes drop dead due to kidney failure because they took an Advil or they took an ibuprofen during a run. And one of these athletes said to me once, I've done it for so many years. It works so well. It will be fine. He died. I never, ever, ever want to hear of somebody taking anti-inflammatories during an event, ever. It is the most dangerous thing you can do. It's like playing Russian roulette. You can spin that barrel so many times and pull the trigger. The day the trigger exits the barrel, that's it. What for? For a medal, for a race? That is crazy. I can't believe that people would put themselves through so much pain and actually look at a quick fix to get them through so much pain to the finish line. If you're not ready for the race and you are in pain, don't even start. It's as simple as that. Build yourself up properly, deal with the pain, make sure that you strengthen it, make sure you get it seen to. If it is a chronic injury, do not run through it. There's plenty of ways of staying healthy with exercise, and you can work around it, but you don't have to put yourself through a massive event like Comrades or any other ultra if tablets are going to be the order of the day. So please, and if you see anybody in buses handing out tablets, grab them, flush them down a water station or something. Don't let them give it to people. It is dangerous. It is playing Russian roulette. I've seen too many tragic stories in the last couple of decades when I've worked with athletes. Instead of drinking cola en route, can I fuel with water, bread, potatoes, and bananas? Absolutely. You absolutely can, as long as you've tried and tested it, as long as you know how much you're taking in, and that it works with you. I think it's quite important. By the way, taking magnesium, it's not going to do anything during the event. If your magnesium stores are nicely topped up before the event, that's the way to look at it. But looking at rehydrate or hydrate or any salt tablets en route, that will play a benefit because that's going to help with immediately making fluid absorption a lot better, a lot more efficient. I need assistance with cramping in my calves the first 2 kilometers. And if you're cramping in the first 2 kilometers, that is not good. You shouldn't be cramping in the first 2 kilometers. Sorry to say. I can understand cramping much later in the event, but 2 kilometers, there's something going on there. Maybe you've got the wrong shoes. Maybe there's something wrong with your calf muscles. Could be some kind of a biomechanical, but you shouldn't cramp so early on. Nausea, I spoke to before. Espresso gel, it could be, are you taking enough water with it? If you're taking the espresso gel, there's no caffeine in that espresso gel. If you're talking about the coffee gel, though, if you're talking about the G-Shot, which is a caffeine gel, can caffeine cause issues in athletes? Yes, they can. Yes, it can. Some people are caffeine intolerant. Just because you drink coffee doesn't mean you're caffeine intolerant. Coffee, it comes with different strengths of caffeine. You can get 30 milligrams in one cup, 40 milligrams in another cup. You know, maybe in an espresso, you would take a bit more. But during exercise, caffeine can also be very sensitive to the stomach. And remember that like a G-Shot is a 60 milligram caffeine shot. So it is quite it's a higher amount of caffeine. And if you can't tolerate caffeine during exercise, then you need to avoid caffeine during exercise. I work with some elite athletes that cannot tolerate caffeine. I love caffeine and it works for me, but it has to be tried and tested during training. It's not for everybody. Somebody asked, can I mix Race Pro with the Race Pro bars? Yes, you can split the feed. So you could have Race Pro 30 minutes, a Race Pro bar 30 minutes, a Race Pro 30 minutes, Race Pro bar. You can mix it up. There's no problem in doing that whatsoever. Is hydration part of fueling? Not really. It is and it isn't. First of all, you have to hydrate and you have to take in energy. But it is part of like a nutrition strategy on the day because fluid intake and energy intake are two things you're going to focus on. So we spoke about energy intake. Let's talk about fluid intake. What is proper hydration? Okay, firstly, you know, Comrades, there's like water tables every 2 kilometers or so. A lot of people say to me, I'm going to take water every 5Ks. I'm like, okay, but that doesn't make sense to me because how long is it going to take you to get to a 5 kilometer table? Some athletes are running, comrades, at like 340, 350 pace. I mean, they're going to go through that 5K table very quickly. Some athlete might be running at a 7 minutes kilometer, and they're going to take a lot longer to get to that table. It's going to take them like 35 minutes to get to that 5K table. So if it's going to take you 35 minutes to get to the 5K table, then I'm sorry to say you can't take in fluid every 5Ks because that might be too long. The idea of fluid intake should be small amounts frequently and not overdoing it, and trying to balance that fluid intake. The more fluid you take in frequently, small amounts, the much better you'll be able to manage it, because you might feel at some stages you need more, at some stages you need less, and you're able to maintain your fluid intake. I recommend like taking in fluid every 10 to 15 minutes, little sips here or there to be able to manage. And if you take in a gel, then take fluid with it as well. It doesn't have to be an entire sachet, but it definitely needs to be a certain amount. How do we know what proper hydration is? Proper hydration is trying to replenish around 80% of the fluid lost in the form of sweat. So as an example, if you know that your weight dropped 1 kilogram during a training session, so you weigh 66, you went and ran, I don't know, hour and a half, you came back, you were weighing 65 kilos. You lost 1 liter of fluid. Let's say it was an hour. You lost 1 liter of fluid in an hour. How much fluid should you have taken in during that hour? You should have tried to get close to 800 mils. And that could be like 180, 200 milliliter feeds every 15 minutes or so. Okay. So that's not a lot. It's a small amount, but that will allow you to get to that 800. If you went running for 2 hours and you came back and you weighed, let's say you were weighing 66 before, you came back and you're weighing 65 and a half kilos, well, sorry, 64 and a half kilos, you've lost 1.5 kilograms, that's 1.5 liters. And then you say, okay, 1.5 liters at 750 mils per an hour, but I need to replenish only 80% of that. Okay, but then you think, oh, wait a minute, but during my exercise session, I drank 400 mils. So now you actually didn't lose 1.5 liters. You actually lost 1.9 liters. You've got to add that back. So it's closer to 2 liters, which means you're back and you're down to around 750 to 800 mils to be able to replenish 80% of that fluid loss. So that's how hydration works. You should weigh yourself before and after a training session. Try and sort of understand the temperatures you're at and what your fluid loss is, and try and work out what 80% of it is, and try and see if you can consume that amount. If it's a high amount, like if it's a normal amount of 400 to 500 or 600 mils of fluid because you're much lighter, etc., probably easy to consume that hourly. But when you start to get to around 800 mils an hour, it's very difficult to get that in. I would suggest taking in a fair amount of salt with that, probably maybe between 500 and 800 milligrams of sodium per hour to try and help maximize that fluid absorption. So there's different ways you can do that. You can take a salt tablet every 30 minutes. We've got our Cramper salt gels, which is the salt gel as well. You could take one every 45 minutes, but as it gets hotter and you're losing more fluid, then I would probably take one every 30 minutes as well. And you take that and you drink water with it. It's not an energy gel, it's an electrolyte gel. So it could be in the form of salt, it could be in the form of a hydration solution, or it could be in the form of like a Cramper salt, an electrolyte gel. And that's how you would try and maximize fluid absorption. Okay, so you've got to understand that and keep it separate. So if I look at a race, if I'm feeding 30 minutes, then I will hydrate 50 minutes, feed 30 minutes with fluid, hydrate 45 minutes, feed 60 minutes with fluid, hydrate 75 minutes, feed 90 minutes with fluid. And that's generally how I work. I look at my watch, I clock feed constantly. So you try and time the tables according to the time. You might not be spot on. But even if you took a gel and the table was further down and you knew you had you took the gel, but I'm going to get to the table in 3 or 4 minutes, that's fine. Take the gel, get the energy in. You can top up with the water when you get there, and it will help pull the gel through a little bit more efficiently. And that kind of fluid to energy balance is really going to make a big difference on the day. Okay, let me just go back to the chat because I'm sure there's quite a few questions in there. And I'll go back to the spreadsheet as well. Will Boom be effective in the last 20 kilometers of a race instead of G-shots? Yeah, it will. I mean, it's a whopping load of caffeine. It's 3 G shots in one. It's 200 milligrams of caffeine, and G shots are 60 milligrams. The question I need to ask is, will your digestive system be able to handle that 200 milligrams of caffeine? If so, then go for it. The only other thing in there is beta-alanine and citrulline malate. Won't impact the digestive system negatively. You might get some tingles from paresthesia from the beta-alanine, but the caffeine will definitely be okay. Can I mix rice and endure in one container? I don't know if I'd do that because, I mean, I just have rice. Why would I put endure in there as well? I mean, they're similar carbohydrates, but the one is definitely a much quicker releasing and absorbing carb. You'll get a much better feed. You can get a higher feed. Endure is only 44 grams of carbs. Rice is about 67 grams of carbs in a serving. I'd go with the higher carb intake, and I'd rather use that. I wouldn't mix the two. One's a slow digesting carbohydrate. The other one is quick releasing. Remember, whatever you consume's got a very specific absorption rate. If I go and put a slow absorbing carb with a fast absorbing carb, they're going to clash. You don't know how it's going to absorb. You don't know what impact is going to happen to your digestive system. Trampasalt, I like to take it hourly, but as it gets hotter, I start to increase the frequency of taking it. If it's not Trampasalt, I would suggest taking in salt tablets or something else. Yes, you can take it together with gels. Yes, you can take it with a G-shot. Those are very separate products. They've got very different uses. Thanks, Tash, for your help. I see Tash has been asking questions. When to take the Race Pro and the hydrate bar. I think I've pretty much gone over that. If I didn't answer it clearly, then let me know. So, I mean, somebody's asked Race Pro Gel, Sports Gel. They're very different. One is a protein carb mix, and it's designed to go up to, when I use Race Pro Gels, I actually consume 115 grams of carbs an hour. I cannot do that with the sports gel. It doesn't sit in my stomach as well and get absorbed. That's my digestive system. So I prefer the Race Pro. I think also protein intake for comrades, very important. I don't think carbohydrates are the only source of energy that's needed. I definitely believe protein should be taken in. I have mentioned that in my webinars. You can take protein at certain stages through the race, like 40 Ks to 60 Ks, and then maybe again at 70 Ks if you want. Depending on how quick you get to those markers. Maybe for some it to be 35 kilometers, 45 and 55, I don't know. But absolutely, I would recommend protein intake. So the Race Pro Gel has got some protein, and it's great to utilize. If you're taking just a plain carbohydrate, then you need to look at maybe a protein shake or something at those particular markers. Okay. So with water, I wouldn't err on the lesser side. I would try and err on taking in. So those sachets are around 200 mils, correct? And I would try taking in at least, like early on, it's going to be cool. So your fluid loss is going to be a lot lower. You might only take like one every 25 minutes in the first part of the race. In the first hour or two. In the third, fourth hour, you might end up having to take every 20 minutes. And by the time you get to like hour 5 or 6, you might, because the temperature's climbed, you might actually end up taking a 200 ml every 15 minutes. So like I said, weigh yourself before after training session, see how much fluid you lose, and try and get a feel for that. It's very different from individual to individual. Just going to see what else there is. We are recording. Somebody, I did mention that in the beginning. Okay, so let me just talk about this. Sorry, Rosemary asked a question here, and it's quite important. I think Tash, you answered it, but so Comrades has decided they want to put our sports gels in the goodie bags. I would have liked them en route, but that's their decision. And the Race Pro bars are going to be put at 4 different tables en route. I will send that. We will definitely send out where those tables will be. Just so you know, the 32 GI Running Club has offered fueling stations for athletes at a cost because they need to hire staff and they need to make sure that they're properly stocked as well, and they've got accommodation costs, etc. But because that's not related to us, it's the actual running club, and they've offered seconding stations, 4 tables en route, spaced quite nicely apart. And if anybody's interested in that, send me an email, coach@32gr.com. I'll put it up just now, and I will connect you with the chairman of the running club because he's the one who's managing it. So he's set it up for some international athletes and for some local athletes that want to use it, and then obviously for the running club members. So you can contact him as well. Okay. I think that's it for now. Tash, thanks so much for your help. Let me go back to the spreadsheet. Okay. In the morning before Comrades, I've spoken about that. Best way to utilize the Power Bundle Pack for race day. Ooh, that's like a soup mix. The bundle pack really allows you to try different products and test what's most suited to you. I would pick 1 or 2 of the products and try and stick to them. There are electrolytes en route. So Thirsty are the official sponsors from a hydration perspective, and they do have Isotonic solutions, which Isotonic solution does have electrolytes. It does have a certain amount of sodium in, and you can consume those. But I would still take additional sodium products en route. I would make sure that I could take additional products because you do need a little bit more salt intake than is in standard products. Gels have got sodium in, chews have got sodium in, bars have got sodium in. The problem is that with sodium intake with these products, they're a nominal amount. They're not a huge amount. And I think that more sodium should be taken in, especially with a race of this nature, so that you're able to absorb a little bit more fluid. Remember, if you eat a lot of salt in your diet, then you should take a higher amount of sodium during the meal. If you're a medium salt eater, I'd say like a middle of the range. If you don't eat a lot of salt, you can go on the lower end of the range. You wouldn't have to stress too much. Okay, so, but most athletes I know eat quite a bit of salt. We sweat it out, we lose it a lot, and we crave it in our food. Somebody asked, what is the best diet to eat prior to the Comrades? First of all, keep it clean. I did mention that in my previous webinar. Don't eat takeout foods that are going to impact your stomach significantly. Stick to foods that you eat that are pretty clean. You don't have to carb load. The point of carb loading is to top up your glycogen stores. Are you racing for a gold medal for a win? No. Most of you are running for a medal, maybe a Bull Rowan, maybe a silver medal, maybe even just a finish. It doesn't matter. The point of the thing is that you could top out your glycogen stores by what? Extra 100 calories, 150 calories. Is that really going to make a difference over like 8 or 9 or 10 hours? Not going to make any difference whatsoever. Most importantly, you can reduce the fat intake and you can up the carb intake a little bit. I would eat in a maintenance. I wouldn't overdo it. And there's no need to also eat a massive meal the night before. Go watch the webinar that I did last week. I spoke about the week before the event, the days leading up to the event, and the night before, the day before, and even the morning of it. There's a lot of information in there. And if you don't get the answers, then just email us. Some energy sachets contain amino acids. I think it's a waste. An amino acid is not a protein. In order for a protein to be a protein, you need entire amount of amino acid chain. You need essential and non-essential. That is classified as a protein. And so, when you get these branch chains or just leucine, etc., it's not a protein. I'm not so worried about that. I don't see a benefit of just adding a few amino acids to a carbohydrate solution. Just add protein. It's got amino acids in it. So somebody recommended per hour on a hot day. One of the training sessions that I love that athletes do, and I advocate it myself, is that you do back-to-back sessions on a single day. So you would run in the morning, like maybe 30 Ks, and then you'd go and do like a 10K in the late afternoon. It makes a 40K load for the day. Just an example, it could be a 20-10, could be a 20-15, whatever you decide. But it's really good to test your hydration in the afternoon because it's been a lot hotter and you'd be able to see what your fluid loss is at that time of day. It's a really good time because Comrades is not just run in the morning. It's run across many hours of the day. And so it would be quite important. I once did a stage race in 2016. It was 204 kilometers of running in a team of four. I ran 56 Ks, I think, of that. We ran it over 18 and a half hours. It was quite a intense race. And in order to train for that race, I ran some Kenyan days. I did a morning run, a lunchtime run, and the evening run, because that's how the race was structured. And I wanted to adapt my body to that kind of load, the feeling, and also obviously trying to understand the hydration status that my body was going to be in at any moment in time. It is important to try and technically train according to how your race is going to pan out on the day so that you've got an idea of what's going to happen. A lot of people only train early morning, and that's a mistake because you could start at 4 o'clock in the morning, you could finish at 7. It's never going to give you an idea of how your body's going to feel in a long race like Comrade. There's some days, like if I'm doing a gearing for an ultra for a long race, I will go intentionally out a lot later. I'll start my training at 8 o'clock and I'll run from 8 till 10, or I'll go from 8 till 11, because in that period of the day it's very hot, and then I'll understand exactly what my fluid loss is. You need to understand what your body's going to do and how it's going to respond in certain times of the day. If you're not doing that, you should try it before Comrades, because it can make a big difference. I did put out a guide for nutrition coming up for Comrades from pre-race until the race. Please go look at the webinar. If you haven't, actually, I'm going to put a link up on this. I'll put a link in this chat now. We did create a fueling guide. For those of you that didn't get it, maybe you didn't see the previous webinar. If you give me a sec, let me just see if I've got that, if I've got it. You know what? I'm going to ask Tashka. Maybe you can put it up in the chat. It's the. Oh no, I don't think you have it. You won't have it. Let me just go and have a look here. Just give me 1 second. I will actually pull up my WhatsApp because the link is in there, and I'll post it in the message group. Just give me 1 sec. Oh, have you got it, Tash? Can you put the link to the fueling guide, please? I mean, that would be a great help if you can. I've actually got it on my. I'm going to share my screen here, just quickly, just so I can run through this, just because I've actually got it. Let me stop the share, and I'm going to share this. There we go. Let me share it. There we go. Can you see it? So I did this fueling guide. It's quite basic. I did it a couple of weeks ago. Just talking about how understanding intensity, just perception versus reality in ultras, the human fuel tank, about glycogen and fat tapping in, sort of carbohydrate per hour intake and what that means from a product perspective. Be prepared and smash your PB. I just put your pre-race, waiting for the start, running, trouble ahead. But then I broke it down into 15 to 30, 35 to 40, and the last leg. So just giving you some tips there. And then also put some race strategies together based on some products. So this is more like a Bull Run to a Big Clapham, for example, 50 grams of carbs per hour. I haven't said 50 grams purely because it's, I believe it's 50 grams. I'm just giving a middle of the range, because some people might be eating too little. But if you can do 60 or 70, that's great. I mean, you can do that. This is just an average. And then these are for guys that want to run gold to silver, a very different combination. And obviously, it's a much higher carbohydrate intake, but more single source feeds, etc. And also combination. I spoke about cramp salt and the G-shot, and then also the benefit of protein intake, etc. So this, I don't know if Tash has put it up in the chat there. If not, I will pop it in. Let me see if I can add that into the chat. I think I can actually. Okay. Put it in there, and you guys can download it off this webinar. There we go. Not there. Okay, so what I'll do is I will make sure to send this out to you. You just got to let me know. You know what? If you drop me an email, I'll send you the link. It must be a download link somewhere here. Just give me 1 second. So that you're not posting it in, and you guys can get it now. Just give me 1 sec. I actually know where this link is. There we go. In the WhatsApp message. Ah, there we go. Okay, I've got it. And there's actually also a marathon fuel guide in there as well. Okay, there we go. I've got it. Okay, I'm putting it in this in the Zoom chat at the moment, and then you guys will have it. And let me just pop it in there. Okay. There we go. It's in the chat. So can you see that link? If you click on that link, it will take you to a folder on Google where there's a number of guides, and you can utilize those. And if there's any questions over and above that, then just feel free to ask. Okay, I'm just going to put up here. This was actually the presentation that we actually did a week ago. I'm just putting up my details there so you can see coach@32gr.com. You're welcome to touch base with me there if you've got any further questions that weren't answered during the session. And somebody just want to say let me just see if there is a few other questions. Tyler, let me just see what you said. He just mentions he uses Race Pro Gel. He does well with it. How much could he take over the race? And the truth of the matter is, as much as your stomach can handle. I take one entire Race Pro Gel every 40 minutes. It's tried and tested though, and it sits very comfortably with me. And that gives me 115 grams of carbs per hour. Is there a benefit to taking 115 grams of carbs over 90? From a performance perspective, very, very little. From a recovery perspective, yes. It has been shown in blood markers that it will aid the recovery process. I'm not going to put up a scientific research study now. If anybody wants it, I can send them the study to look at. But it was very interesting that based on certain blood markers, it showed a drop in inflammation and other kinds of markers much quicker after exercise. Even CK levels showing muscle damage, etc. Post-exercise. Athletes that consumed a high amount of carbohydrates recovered a lot quicker. And so if you are doing back-to-back races or stage races, it's fine. But if you are doing an ultra and you want to try and look for a performance edge and risk compromising gastrointestinal comfort, I would say rather go to 90 grams, don't go higher than that. I don't think there's a major difference from a performance perspective between the two, and I think 90 is okay. Okay, so I think that's quite important to mention. All right, so there doesn't seem to be any more questions. I hopefully have answered most of them. I just want to say thank you very much for joining me this session. I hope it was valuable. I hope I did answer most of your questions. I will send out the recording as well. And yeah, I just think that with Comrades coming up, really take care of yourself. There's terrible flus going around and viral infections. Try and avoid crowded places at the moment. Make sure you're taking stuff to keep your immune system up. Get enough sleep. Hydrate properly. Eat cleanly. And really just look after yourself, because the training is pretty much done. And right now, it's really about freshening up, sharpening up, and getting to race day in the best possible shape. And that means health, and that means fitness, and that means freshness as well. You don't want to be fatigued on the day. So I wish you all the best. I will be at Comrades Expo. I will be at the stand. You're welcome to come and ask me more questions. If you're not 100% sure about your fueling strategy and you want to discuss it with me at the stand, I'm more than happy to help. I do get inundated with emails, so I work on a first in, first out kind of a basis. But I do try and really help as many people as I possibly can. I want you guys to have the best possible race ever. And I really, truly hope that you do. So have a blessed rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll chat again soon.